Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. This video is about 16 points that help you understand why I'm right to fire back in my videos. Now I'm going to start with an argument that's a little bit disturbing, but I think that it needs to be said here. By the time that you're done with this video, you should understand that part of what they're saying, and there's straight people trying to take advantage of you, there's gay people trying to take advantage of you. Who would have thought, right? And part of what they're trying to say is turning the other cheek in a kind of LGBT way, right? They're saying bend over, right? Okay, and some people are saying that to you are straight people. And they're saying it to women, and they're saying it to guys in a way that isn't necessarily pointing to gay activity. But there's a lot of gay people with power, so to some degree it is. So they're saying turn the other cheek in that sense, right? Referring to your behind. Okay, so now let me try to prove this very controversial point. And I'm going to be reading scriptures a little bit here. So let's just take a moment here and let's clear our heads. Everyone think about doing the right thing. I'll have a moment of silence for those who died doing the right thing. Okay, so point number 1. I am the gate, so I must defend my principles. Okay, so if I was to say this to somebody, hey, I am the gate, right? I'm the most righteous person. Proverbs 16:12, the throne is established in righteousness. I must defend my principles. I am the gate. Point number 2. Isaiah 28:6. He will be a spirit of justice to the one who sits in judgment, a source of strength to those who turn back the battle at the gate, be they kings, be they individuals who have fulfilled the scripture in Matthew 7. First remove the log from your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. It's a relative speck. People have rainforests in their eyes these days. Point number 3. When no one on the planet has a viable counter-argument for the implications of the fact that the top martial artist ever possible is the smartest person ever possible, the wisest, the most insightful, what have you, and he believes in God. I believe in God, I am he. It is clear that everyone should see that I am right to defend the gate. I'm the wisest person ever possible, wiser than the people who wrote the Bible. Wiser than you are. How can you then tell me, the person most in touch with God, that I'm magically not right to do what I'm right to do, which is to fire back at those heathens, like John the Baptist and Stephen the Martyr, who chastised him, like Samson and David, who chastised him by their actions, what have you, like Jesus, who says, how can you who are evil say anything good? Which is a form of firing back. Think about it. You brood of vipers. Point number 4. I get fumed daily, especially when I am making videos. So even if I magically wasn't right, and obviously I'm right, to fire back at them, I'm being fumed. And it affects my judgment. But it's part of the story to record my response to the persecution. And obviously I'm right to fire back. Point number 5. I get covertly poisoned daily, but I still live a more respectable life than anyone else. What does that tell you about my judgment and my response? Point number 6. Making videos is good for me, and it reinforces my superior beliefs that keep me on the morally precise path. And that includes firing back. What exactly happens to the mentality of someone who doesn't fire back? Well, the vast majority of so-called Christians, they say turn the other cheek, right? They say just forgive them. Now, what kind of world has it produced? What kind of actions have they taken? They keep voting for bad candidates. They keep propounding propaganda. They're turning the other cheek in a sense that is not accurate. If a newborn baby slaps you across the face, so to speak, turn the other cheek, so to speak. Let's stop them from doing it, right? If somebody's trying to rape your wife and slaps you when you fall to the ground, you get up and turn the other cheek? No. What kind of a monster would say otherwise? And what they're saying is like a variation of that. Point number 7. The timeline makes it clear that I have many reasons to be angry. Even you look at the last 10 years, right? Someone in 8th grade 10 years ago could have a master's degree right now. And they could have graduated college. Their lives were wasted like you wouldn't believe. What occurred during that time? The coronavirus, social distancing, all the nonsense that's going on, cancel culture, all the lunacy that you see, and that you've seen in the last 10 years ruined their high school experience. It ruined their college experience, all the way to a master's degree. And there's no logical hope for the future. People think that being a Christian is pretending that there's hope for the future no matter what. No, that's not what it means. That's not what Isaiah was saying, Hosea, Amos, Zechariah, Obadiah, Zephaniah, Moses, Aaron. They're saying the opposite of that. And there's going to come a point when the day of the Lord comes. The righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Now, why are they taken away? Because they kept their mouth shut? No. Because they chastised worms. And the worms got offended. They said, why aren't you obeying us? Why are you rebuking us by your actions, by your speech, what have you? And so they screened them out. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Point number 8. I have been making videos for about 16 years, and people are not processing how serious the situation is, and they are not responding in a mature manner. Perhaps I should just, talk in a way that doesn't reflect the urgency of the situation. Obviously, I'm doing a great job. And it's because I'm doing everything you could possibly expect me to do. Say, why didn't you explain it in a way that was serious if I was saying it was calm? And that'd be a good question. Why weren't you chastising people? Why didn't you put a lamp on its stand by explaining who's wrong and who's right? Which is a form of firing back. The Bible says people are tested by their praise, and flog a mocker, and the simple will learn prudence, and so on and so forth. Who, what, when, where, how, why? A lot of people say, well, we're not supposed to do that. But Matthew 7 shows you that Jesus, according to your book, as a character in your book, is commanding you to do just that. Remove the log from your own eye. And then remove the speck. When he says, go teach the gospel to the world, is he talking to somebody who has a log in their own eye that hasn't removed? He say, first remove the log from your own eye, then teach the gospel. If they try to argue that their pagan deities are superior, or that people magically should obey the damn evil state, then you chastise those worms. There's various techniques that can be used when it comes to removing the speck from your brother's eye, but all of them should be within the boundaries of true righteousness and justice, and stop injecting white supremacy and any other ethnocentrism and your LGBT agendas and your political agendas and your economic agendas and your sexual agendas. Stop injecting these things into the situation. It's disgraceful. You disgrace yourselves. You make your lives worse. It's sick. Point number 9. They persecute my family to some degree as well. You think people who are persecuting your wife, perhaps, I'm not married, but, say your kids, I don't have kids, say your parents and your brothers and sisters. They're persecuting your family, okay, one way or another. You think you should tiptoe through the tulips with them? Play patty cake with them? Just pray it away? Did David tell his soldiers just pray when they were facing the Philistines and the Jebusites and the Amorites and what have you? And whoever else they faced, or may have faced, we'll say. No. When speaking of himself, he said, "This day I will strike down Goliath," right? Speaking of Goliath, speaking of himself. Cut off his head, even cut off his head after striking him down. And the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. He didn't just strike him down with the stone. He took his own sword and he cut off his head. It's 1 Samuel 17. Look it up. Toward the end of the chapter. Okay. And he pursued the Philistines all the way to the gates of Gath, I believe it was, and strikes them down, plunders them, what have you. Point number 10. They send me messages in a way that is designed to agitate me to the extreme. And I mean far beyond even the most obnoxious trolls in popular culture. With military-grade psychology, they provoke me. Point number 11. They try to get me to change my religion. As Ron Isley might say, what I saw was enough to drive a preacher wild. They do like what the moneylenders did, but worse. Point number 12. They financially sabotage me even though it works against them far more than it works against me. Add that confusion and chaos and their counterproductive and unbelievably stupid moves to the insult. Point number 13. They killed some of my family members even though it is obvious their families have been made complete scum far more than they otherwise would have been as a result. You see, a great warrior is willing to sacrifice all of his family for a cause. So they just make some immature, kind of racist, gay person noises, occult noises, while their families rot and go to hell. And again, that's an example of firing back. Because as I brought that up, some people might say, "Oh my gosh, thank goodness I didn't, do what he, didn't do the right thing or something." That's stupid. Let's give you a quick parable real quickly here. There was once two brothers. One was Cain, one was Abel. This is before Cain kills Abel. They both go to war against wicked people. Now keep in mind the Garden of Eden story isn't saying that there was no one else on earth as a story for another day. So they both go against wicked people in a battle. And Cain says, what if one of us or both of us gets killed? And Abel slaps him across the face and says, "Stop being a bitch." And Cain says to him, "Well, what if I know for sure that one of us is going to get killed?" And Abel socks him across the jaw and lays him out flat. And he says, "Didn't I tell you to stop being a fucking bitch?" Point number 14. When gays sexually harass people and pretend that homosexuality is normal, as if having, gay sex is normal or something, okay, it is disgusting and annoying as it gets. And I don't say this to insult the LGBT community, If you think it's too insulting, please, I urge you to comment. I say this because when we're looking at things, especially something as when we're talking about LGBT behavior, is superficial as sex. Now again, sex is an important issue. It gets quite deep and profound. But if someone's right to dress up like, Snow White while they're having sex is not so profound as the deeper implications of procreation and making love, what have you. So when we're talking about LGBT sex, we're talking about something that is shallow, something that is quote-unquote gay. The opposite of deep can be seen as gay. It's shallow. In fact, if you look up gay in the Urban Dictionary, it's been defined as stupid and pointless. Again, I'm not trying to insult them. I'm trying to get them to use their heads. Should a rocker argue that it is normal and ideal to be a rocker? No, because it's clearly self-destructive. And I go as far as to say rockers are disproportionately gay. It's a very gay-like act. It's like the frenzy of Dionysus. It comes in various forms. The frenzy of a Viking, the frenzy of a gay parade, the frenzy of a rock concert. Those are three very distinctly different things. If you think they're not distinctly different, go tell somebody of Scandinavian descent who takes it seriously that you think that, the Viking frenzy is just like a gay parade or something. They're distinctly different. Okay. You should understand my point by now. Let's finish this video. We only got a couple more points here. Point number 15. The Bible is made by the oppressor to make it so their slave-master culture goes more smoothly. It is a mistake to default. Now, default with it, excuse me. Now, why am I right about this? It goes beyond the argument of, typical leftists or something. What is the history of the Bible? What is the historicity of the Bible? Well, there was various councils that went into the Bible. Various meetings took place. One was the Council of Nicaea, the most famous of them, in 324 AD. Quite often they talk about it as if it was the only council. The Council of Nicaea came up with the Nicene Creed, which was very important when it came to determining what books would go into the Bible. The Roman government was aware of the council. They allowed the council. They decided it was good for Rome to have that council. Before that, they were killing Christians. There was a lot of strife between Christian factions and between Christians and pagans and whoever else. Just like eventually the Reformation would come and the Counter-Reformation, things like the Inquisition came after the Council of Nicaea. So, that council was called by corrupt people, with bishops who didn't agree on everything. These people did not agree on everything. But someone's going to sit there like a complete idiot and act like the council was inspired by God or something. In a sense, yeah, because the subject matter was God. But these people did not agree on everything. In fact, a guy named, I believe his name was Arius, from North Africa, he was told to leave the council. Just like the moneylenders didn't like Jesus doing what he was doing. Just like the Pharisees told Jesus to stop. He was told to stop. What makes you think that the rest of them are right and that he was wrong? And I'm not saying he was right. I'm not saying that. You hypocrites. Are you not from a church faction that is full of people who argue that their faction is right and that everyone else is wrong if you're from the church? How can you then turn around and say that that council must have been right? You who do not even know who wrote the Bible. You who admit that Jesus never wrote a book in the Bible. How can you then turn around and say that? Biblos, whose deity is Balat, the Lady of Byblos, where we get the word Biblos, meaning book, and where we get the word Bible. Where the false image of Christ is Serapis, Osiris, Hades, and Apis, where Osiris's body was said to be chopped up in one of the later versions of the Osirian story. Okay, it's said to be chopped up and sent to Byblos, or put in a coffin. There's different versions of the story, and sent to Byblos, right? Tricked him, put Osiris in a coffin, and his body, washed up in Byblos. Sometimes they say Phoenicia. You see that? Where Hades is said to be Zeus's alter ego, and Zeus is the main deity of Greece, and Jupiter in Rome. His wife Juno, a deity of the Capitoline Mint. So it was money, the root of all evil, and pagan power that called for the Council of Nicaea, where these bishops were more often than not at least in the closet heathens who were more concerned with social control than the worship of God. As we see to this day, there's nothing new under the sun, they say, as we see to this day. If you were to argue that no, the church went wrong later, at what point did it go wrong? Before the Counter-Reformation? Before the Reformation? Before the Inquisition? When did it go wrong? Look at the history of Rome. Look at the history of feudalism. When do you think the church went wrong? It was wrong the whole time. When a bunch of scoundrels allowed it to be and didn't allow other things to be, why do you think that is? Because they collaborated with scoundrels as scoundrels. How could you miss that? How could you be so slack in your work and you don't see that you're surrounded by wolves in sheep's clothes who are smiling like wolves all the time? Wolves with what passes for sheep's clothes these days, rather. Point number 16. Think of Dionysus, who on the channel Mythology and Fiction explained in the video that he's the god of wine, festivity and pleasure, and madness. Think of Dionysus. There's a bunch of people in various cults like the cult of Dionysus that provoke people in a way that's been refined for thousands of years, really. And they say, well, how do you get at the opposition? They've been doing, that's part of their religion, or their culture, at least. That's the sorry excuse for religion, to get at the opposition, to try to make it so people don't take things seriously. They're far more obnoxious than the most obnoxious fraternity activity when you consider their sum total behavior, their collective behavior. Every 6.5 minutes, a woman or child is raped, and Dionysian thinking is key. In fact, Dionysus is a deity of rape by deception, ritual madness, right? It is crazy to rape a child. And Zeus, who's said to be an older version of Dionysus, the young Zeus, is said to have raped Ganymede. So we see when they talk about Diana, right, which is part of, Dionysus has many roots, right? Dios meaning Zeus, Diana and Isis, Dionysus, Dios meaning, Zeus or so-called God, and Nusa meaning tree. He's a deity of vegetation, vines, trees, grapes to harvest, among other things. Wine, big time wine, just like in the Bible. There's Demeter with the bread. So we look at the cult of Diana. It used to be that in their cult, and she's a huntress, mind you, that there was a runaway slave who would be the head of the cult, and how he would replace his predecessor is he would face him in single combat, like the African martial societies would do in the transatlantic slave trade, and they cited their history in Africa. They argued that that was the history of the cult in Africa. And the cults, quite often these cults would engage in single combat to determine who's in charge. And you see this in various myths and in various cultures throughout the world. And you also see the stick-fighting priests of Osiris, Tati, being straightforward and honest through the use of the stick. You see the Horus is a god of war. Montu is a god of war. Sekhmet, war traits. Bastet, war traits. Set, Sobek, all war traits. Cults all had warlike components. But the true idea of justice in its pinnacle, obviously is God and his son Horus, who is said to be the pharaoh, the fair reproductive cycle. Fair love, true justice, true war arts, at its pinnacle. The falcon, a symbol of wisdom, justice, love, true love, war arts, all the martial art principles, timing, willpower, determination, focus, heart, and on and on and on and on. So when one is far beyond more serious than the most serious samurai, about what matters most, about being loyal to God, what have you, and you get these monsters who are just abusing everyone. Should he be slack in his work? Should he not draw the sword of Scripture, whether it manifests, not in an occult manner, mind you, whether it expresses itself, we'll say, as a verbal assault or a physical assault? Should he be slack in his work? No. The Bible, when interpreted correctly by the wisest person ever, is not telling you to turn the other cheek no matter what. That is preposterous. That is outrageous. That is insane. We see that even those of you who interpret Revelation as literal, even locusts are said to be ordered to harm people. Horsemen and their riders. Is turning the other cheek unconditional? And who are you to say that between Acts and Revelation, for example, that no one is supposed to take up arms? That is stupid. I've been saying this for years. Back when I used to describe myself as a prince of Judah, the only prince of Judah doing the right thing, when I used to describe myself that way, and the default spiritual leader of all of humanity, when I used to describe it that way before I realized that I'm Christ, the Christos, the anointed, the King of Kings. I knew that a righteous leader has a right to execute judgment. For those of you who think you should turn the other cheek no matter what, if you are a judge, should you not imprison people? That's not turning the other cheek. That's punishing the person. Should you not defend your nation with deadly force, or should you let him strike you down? And if a leader rules over all people, and he has a right to order people to kill people when it's justified, then why wouldn't the average person have a right to follow that order and strike a knave down? And as I have established the true divine throne in righteousness, do I not have the right to give that order? The government might not like it. White supremacists might not like it. The church might not like it. But I'm right and they're wrong. And what do you think is right? To serve God or selfish liars?